Dilly, welcome to the podcast. I want to start, as I said earlier before we started recording, with a public thank you. I've lost count the number of times I've asked you or us to reschedule this podcast. So thank you for being patient.
No problem at all, Alex, man. I understand being a family man is what happens.
Yeah,
Understand.
yeah. I think there's just constantly random things popping up, and I can't remember all of the things that have happened where I've emailed you the day of a recording. I've been like, Dilly, can we just push back again, please? But today we're going to be diving into the product Toxaprevent, and we're going to discuss kind of how it works, the research behind it, and some of the kind of clinical considerations when we might want to consider it if we're a practitioner, and how we might want to consider it, I guess, as a member of the public as well. But before we dive into that, are you happy just to start with a little bit around you and your background?
Yeah, so yeah, my name's Dilly. I'm from Nouveau Healthcare. It was basically a bit of like a journey on my own, really. I suffered from severe urticaria and like 2011, 2012, and it was like a kind of a hit and miss where it would kind of go up and down. Like I'd have like these really good days, and I was like significantly overweight. I think I was like at my heaviest like 23 stone. So it's like 130 odd kilos plus. I was a big dude and just had like a lot of health problems. And I used to be in like the printing industry for many years. And it was crazy. Like we used to do printing for a charity, and one of the guys who ran the charity owned like a medical company, and he introduced me to Toxaprevent, and I kind of looked at it and I thought, what the hell is this? Like, I didn't understand like what the hell his product was because obviously I'd never been in the health industry before. And then he just kind of said the word histamine, and I just remember hearing that word, and I thought, never heard of like you hear of histamine, and in your mind you're thinking antihistamine, and like I was like an antihistamine, like I literally popped them like they were Smarties, like it was like when you go to allergy season, like loratadine and cetirizine hydrochloride, like my god, I remember you could go to like the pound store and get Pirities for like 99 pence and stuff like that. Go and you'd buy like six boxes at a time. And then I went to my GP, and he said, he was like, "Oh, yeah, Dilly, you've got well, you've called me Mr. Cooler, he could talk to you properly." He just goes, "Oh, I'm gonna put you on a really strong antihistamine." And so he kind of gave me prescription loratadine and prescription cetirizine hydrochloride, but then he said like take fexofenadine as well. And I just felt like, I just felt awful. I just, you constantly feel bloated. I just felt like I felt lethargic and tired constantly. And it was that kind of like that led me onto this thing like, what the hell is going on in my system? And he said, take an antihistamine. And you don't think about histamine, do you? You never think like what are food allergies? You don't know, like, you get these like symptoms like bloating, and you think,
Right.
oh, it's probably just the food that I'm eating. Da, 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 da. And then sat down in a meeting with one of like with our business partner. He sadly passed away, but Lars, one of our colleagues, he kind of said to me, he said, in like a really thick German accent, and he went, Dilly, like take this, you take this capsules, you take two of these 3 times a day, and you take one of these sachets every day. Did that for like 6 months, and that's the story. I've never ever had urticaria ever since. Never had a breakout. Don't have itchiness. I
Wow.
had pizza the other day. It was amazing. I ate cheese, no issues at all. I don't get any bloating, and I did every diet, you name it, and went through it. And I basically treat myself of like histamine, and I do use the word treat quite openly as well because I haven't had a reaction in such a long time. And then it kind of led me into this journey of like discovering and understanding what histamine actually is. And then every time I heard the words like histamine intolerance, I was like, how can you be intolerant to histamine when your body naturally produces it? It doesn't make sense. And so yeah, that was it. That was my journey to histamine. And next thing you know, I'm like talking, lecturing, and discussing histamine, and I've built an entire company based on the back of histamine, basically.
Brilliant. So it's probably a good place to start because some people they might have the basic concept of what histamine is, that it's, part of the immune system, that it can contribute to reactions if there is this kind of what we call a histamine intolerant thing going on. But how would you, I guess, introduce this concept?
So, so for histamine for me is like it's an immune response. We know the immune system releases it, and for me, histamine is it's an alarm system. It's the body's way of telling you that something's going on. but it's also a response into fighting whatever the issue actually is. So, like, we talk about leaky gut, and we kind of go into the idea of like having things like glucosamine sulfate, which are fantastic at heal. We know that they're fantastic healers, and we can go down the kind of like the areas of minerals. But the problem is when the immune system is overreactive and it's producing that histamine, that's going to trigger all those symptoms. And so histamine isn't bad for us because it's in, because it's like it's good, it's a good way of protecting ourselves. But too much histamine, that's where the problem lays, is the fact that if there's too much histamine in the body, our immune system's going to be overreactive and we're start going to get the symptoms of histamine intolerance, which we're going to start feeling. And people will kind of like, look at like the histamine diets, and they'll look at like the FODMAPs, and they'll look at adding in certain minerals, and they are all fantastic. Don't get me wrong, Alex. I'm never against those diets. I think they're brilliant diets, and I have had a lot of respect and time for people that do them. But the problem for me is that they don't fix the underlying issue, because you're soothing the problem, but you're not taking away the excess histamine.
Mm.
And so that's where products like Toxaprevent play a massive major role, because for me, histamine is like it's a good thing. It is a good thing. You just need to optimize the levels and rebalance the immune system, and that's really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a key point, which is some of these diets, they do have a prominent role to play, but often they are symptom management rather than dealing with underlying issues. And you talk, I know on your website and on your YouTube channel, there are articles and videos that talk around Toxaprevent and its role in detoxing mold and mycotoxins, for example. It's good for supporting and repairing the integrity of the gut lining.
Mm.
And it's good for histamine in the gut as well, which and obviously that can contribute to all sorts of different symptoms from bloating to diarrhea, etc. So with all that in mind, I guess the most obvious follow-up question to that is, what on earth is Toxaprevent?
So yeah, so well, basically it started in 2004 actually. Mr. Gerner, who's the founder of the company, he really wanted to get into like detoxification and understanding it better. And so zeolites have been around for like hundreds of thousands of years. They've been used in all kind of crazy areas, but one of the main areas that they've actually been used for is animal feed. So aflatoxins, ochratoxins, and mycotoxins all come from, are kind of like sprayed into because they get into the crops, and those crops then fed to the animals, or they're fed to the human being, like where we're making bread. And he had seen, like, his years of research into it, he'd seen that happen into, like, into the farming. But the problem was, and I know agriculture's changed in the last 20 odd years. We're now seeing mass produced products, we're now seeing an explosion of vegan products across the market, and those mycotoxins and molds are still going to be going up. And even though we have such great quality control, we can't always control everything. So what he did was he looked at it from a human being's perspective, and he said, "How do we?" Because the illness doesn't just go into the animal; the illness goes into the human being who's consuming the plants and the animals and whatever have you. And so he kind of realized that Deerlight had its, it was known as like this miracle product, and a lot of people were talking about bentonite clays and other areas, but one of the bad things was that zeolite, it's a volcanic ash, it derives from volcanoes. And so that volcanic ash, you must remember, it's like a rock. And so what he realized was that if it went into the liver or kidneys to be processed, it could actually cause harm. And then the other thing is when it's sat in the ground, it's actually absorbing toxins in the air and the environment, because that's how it creates that kind of like, that rock-like structure. My colleagues have actually, I think, bought me a present of a piece of zeolite rock, and it's just a massive piece of rock. I wish I'd had it sat at my desk. I could have showed to you guys, but yeah, it's incredible. And he realized that there's a process behind it because of how it needs to be kind of like, purified and manufactured. So Mr. Gerner started looking at that process, and he basically founded a process. And a bit like Coca-Cola, we kept, instead of patenting it, we actually kept the idea to ourselves. And what he did was like he founded a process which actually changed the way the zeolite was broken down in the rock, and it's heated up to like a really high temperature, and then it's ripped apart. So what you have in the product is pure canopterolite zeolite. And then he realized he got this pure ingredient, and that's great. But then you need to prove it, right? You can't just go, well, this is the cleanest product on the market. So in 2004, we were actually taken to court by Bayer and Pfizer, weirdly enough, and that was because the company wanted to see if the product could do what it says, because we were kind of like treating people with histamine tolerance, and they said like, how can this product be a food supplement? So we actually beat them in court, and we were founded as a medical device. And so what they said was, to be a medical device, you need to not have an effect on the body. So when you like put a pair of glasses on, a pair of glasses are medical devices because you put them on, then they help your eyes to see. And that's what Toxaprevent was doing. So we proved that we could. So we actually patented, and not only proved it, we patented it. We showed that we could bind to histamine, heavy metals, mycotoxins, aluminium, arsenic, cadmium, dimethylamine, tyramine, nitrosamine. So we basically just went, right, we're going to prove it. We proved it. We then did a medical device. We then got the approval to show that we only stayed in the digestive tract. So we didn't allow the kidneys to be processed. And then since 2006, we've been registered as a medical device. And from that, we've gone from liver and kidney detoxification to intestinal permeability to now to leg ulcers. We basically proved all these areas. And the greatest thing is that since 2006, we've never had someone ever have a direct side effect from taking Toxaprevent. So no, not one person's ever had a side effect from taking the physical product. And that's kind of where the journey kind of came from. And people look at the packaging for the Toxaprevent and they're just like, "Oh, it looks a bit medically," but we made it medical because it's a very serious kind of area, if you know what I mean. But because of that, we created this absolute beautiful product with all this research and rich history behind it, but has a real benefit to a user.
Yeah, I didn't know some of that story. That's really interesting.
Not many people do. Everyone gets you always think of like the manufacturing of like supplements, and you look at it like, oh, it's got like, it's a founder's compass in their own journey. But yeah, it's crazy trying to get a medical device product as a medical device. Like, people don't understand like the time and effort it takes to actually get done as a medical device. And like, for example, this, since Brexit, we've had to, as a company, Nouveau Healthcare, we had to like upgrade our offices. We've now got ISO 13845, 9001. We're working towards their standards. We've had to get wholesale dealers license to put it in place. We're now getting audited by the MHRA, I think, like in 2 months' time. And I'm just like sat there, and like, you've got all these quality control systems. So even when Toxaprevent stock comes in, one of my colleagues, Clarissa and Path, have to sit there and physically go through the boxes and mark off and say, right, QC check, QC check. And it's just like, my God, it's so much checking. But it's amazing as well because it shows you the quality and the perfection that goes into such a good product. And when you're passionate about it, it's like, I get a big smile on my face. I'm like, yep, this is perfect. Let's get it out to people.
Awesome. So we're basically saying it's could we say in another word that it's a binder, it's binding some of
Yeah.
these and then essentially you're pooing them out.
Yeah. Basically, yeah. It's literally going in, absorbing to the toxins, and then passing out through natural bowel movement.
So with that in mind, one of the things that I think is really important and helpful to know about Toxaprevent is the fact that you've also shown that it doesn't bind to our own micronutrients, I believe. And this is why on the instructions you can take Toxaprevent sort of before meals, whereas if it's charcoal, clay, some of these more old school binders, if that's an appropriate term, those are often recommended to be taken well away from food and other supplements and medications. And without wanting to feel like I'm a seller of Toxaprevent, which obviously I'm not, one of the challenges I found clinically with clients is taking a supplement away from mealtime. Like either they forget or it's just inconvenient having to take it out with them, etc. So I think a real bonus of Toxaprevent is the fact that it's not binding to some of these good things as well.
Yeah, like the old school binders, as you called them, like your activated charcoal, they were brilliant products because the way that they worked was they just basically bound to everything. So if you had like food poisoning, you could just take activated charcoal and it would just grab hold of everything. But the thing is, with activated charcoal and binders that are on the market now, a lot of people, what they'll do is they don't do the level of research that's needed to actually put a binder into the system. Because like, we look at food supplements now, for example, we put a lot of effort and time and research into the supplements that we provide, and even the blends that people come out with. But with the binders, a lot of the research is based on really old data. And so because of that, you can't guarantee one, the purity of the product to say, okay, has this got approvals to say that when it came from the ground, it's not come from it's not bound to other toxins. They don't show their cleanliness reports. And then thirdly, the fact that you don't know where it's going in the body, that's really, really important. Like, I said it's volcanic ash. That goes into the liver, the kidneys to be processed. You could actually having such a significant impact onto the liver and the kidneys. And I'll always get like, Alex, I can't even begin to the amount of times I've had like emails come from companies like, you said this, how could you say this? And then I always go, well, I'm saying it because I've got my evidence. Why don't you show me yours? And then if you can prove me wrong, I will eat my words, and I'll apologize, and I'll say that, and I'll say, right, guys, there's another product on the market. But then no one ever does it. And I'm always like confused by that. And like those binders are very, very good and they're very, very supportive. But I think we kind of need to be able to show that we're actually supporting the person and actually making a massive impact. And it's the fact that you said, like with the nutrients, one of the research papers we had to do was we had to, because we optimized the particle size between 6 and 10 microns. So you can imagine like a piece of hair is around about, I think, 11 microns or 12 microns. So you can imagine they're really tiny, tiny particles. And what we had to do was we basically had to give patients the Toxaprevent, but we had it bound to, like, the radioactive material you do when you're doing like an X-ray of the stomach. Yeah, I forgot what it's called
Yeah.
now. And we had to give them that, and it bound to those toxins. And then we watch it travel through the intestines and through the colon. And basically, we had to keep doing that, replicating that over and over again to show that we only stayed in the GI tract. Because if the yellow markers had come back up in the liver or kidneys, we couldn't have got those
Right.
licenses. And then we had to then we've now got longitudinal studies, so part of a medical device. We have to show that we're collecting real-time customer data to see how their minerals are impacted. And so we do that. We do like blood tests, we've done hair mineral analysis, we've done stool tests, we've done urine tests, and we
Wow.
get these reports. And every so often they come out. And I've got the most recent updated one that I produced, and we stuck it on the back of the practitioner portal. But that shows that your vitamins, minerals, and nutrients aren't impacted. So it just shows you the level of information you have to go into just to prove that safety as a binder.
Yeah, that is fascinating. And I know that Dr. Jill Christer, who obviously many of our listeners will be familiar with, she's kind of a big name within the mold mycotoxin space for those that don't know her. And it's anecdotal, but she has said publicly that she's found that with some of her clients where they have been using some of these other binders over a long period of time, that she is seeing nutrient depletions as a result of it. So, we do see it happening in the real world. To be clear about it, I still use some of those binders at times, but I am more cautious. I use them for much shorter periods of time than maybe I once did. And Toxaprevent is a really great alternative from that perspective around this, because a lot of people are already nutrient deficient, I guess is the other way to think about this.
I think you hit the nail on the head there, Alex. So many people are nutrient deficiency in crazy kind of ways. Like you see it with like blokes, for example, with fertility, like looking at just like zinc levels and testosterone levels, like the fact that your testosterone levels are depleting, year by year by year. And we've got products now coming out for autophagy. I don't know if you remember, we did a talk a couple of years back on autophagy and cellular regeneration. Your aging of your body is happening continuously, and those toxins are being exposed in our system. And I don't think people think that, okay, it's fine, I'm getting like, my protein powder and I'm getting my veggies and my meats. But it's crazy. It's like we're not teaching people how to even cook those foods. I don't know about you, Alex. You must have loads of friends, right, who boil like their food, like they'll boil their broccoli to an inch of their life. And they're like, yeah, hey, Alex, man, I'm healthy. And like you just start like, yeah, you are. And you can't say that to them, but you're like, there's other ways of like fortifying and cooking those nutrients into it. And it's even like like this idea of like, rice and pasta being bad for you, but then people aren't taught about resistant starches and how we can cook rice again and we can turn it into a fiber which is good for the body. And it's like, and you kind of get all these people telling you this, and it's like I get all these calls and I'm like, how are we not teaching people this, like such basic ideas of nutrition? I'm not an NT. I understood this from my data and reading, and it's like it blows my mind.
Yeah, I think And going back to, I guess, the histamine side of things, because we do have an awful lot of customers who struggle with what we would call histamine intolerance.
Yeah.
And obviously, there are different reasons why people can. So I know I've heard you obviously talk about this a lot before. We've got the DAO enzyme, which is in the gut, which is breaking down excess histamine there. And we've got HNNT, which is an enzyme on our skin and sort of in the body, which is kind of dealing with some of that excess histamine. And I think the DAO is an interesting one because obviously, if you have intestinal permeability or damage to the gut lining, then that can impact the capacity of DAO to degrade histamine. And I wonder, I don't know if through the research you've been able to look this specifically at mechanisms, but assuming really that you're binding some of that excess histamine in the guts, and we know that excess histamine can be quite irritating for the gut lining, that's one obvious mechanism by which this is working.
So when we did our study on leaky gut syndrome and intestinal permeability, the way we looked at it was way out the way when I was speaking to the team and we were actually looking through the research paper. So the clinical trial was based on like the MediPure capsules. And
Okay.
what they did was they did the zonulin test, which we all know is like one of the markers of a leaky gut. And so what they did the zonulin test to see if there was high levels of zonulin, and everyone reported high levels of zonulin. And then all they did was they gave people 3 capsules of the MediPure 1 hour before breakfast, and then 3 capsules of the Toxaprevent MediPure 2 hours after your evening meal. They did that for 3 months, and then they remeasured the zonulin markers, and the zonulin markers actually declined to the point where there was no like they were in the reference ranges and they were very very good. And what they were saying was basically that the intestine what happens is when your body's exposed to a lot of different toxins, whether it be molds or mycotoxins, or whether it be different types of foods that are going in and our body's reacting to it, what will happen is the zonulin sits obviously in the intestinal wall, and that kind of goes in, it binds to the nutrients and pulls them through, but it keeps the bad toxins out, which go into our stool and our passed out, our gallbladder, our pancreas, our portal veins, pulling those toxins out, processing them in the kidneys, and then pushing them out for the colon. But what will happen is as we kind of get allergies and histamine intolerance, that intestinal, that's our wall, our immune system, as it starts to respond to those toxins coming in, it starts to create inflammation in the intestines, and that protects the intestines from those toxins. But what will happen is because zonulin's trying to get those nutrients in, zonulin increases, and that pushes the intestinal wall lining further and further apart, which then causes the leaky gut. So when we looked at that, we realized that that's what it was doing, that the actual immune system was trying to protect the body, because the body actually has a protective mechanism. And as we know, histamine is released as a protective mechanism. And so histamine was creating an inflammation, which was stopping the toxins from being absorbed by the system. So when people took the Toxaprevent, what was happening is the original toxins which were going in, which would cause that inflammation in the first instance, were being removed. But then in addition, the histamine was being bound in the intestinal wall and being removed. And so what that allowed was the inflammation to slowly get back down. So the intestine started to close. And in the actual MANC, we actually preload it with calcium. Now, calcium is really, really important because it actually triggers primary homeostasis. So if there's wounds, it will actually trigger the wound to heal, because it's how our body knows that the wound needs to heal. And with that, we then completely reversed a leaky gut. And because we did that, things like your foods being eaten, your food intolerances, they all started to disappear. And that's where the research came off. And if you look at the packaging of the product, it will say for the strengthening of the intestinal wall barrier.
Yeah,
That's why it says that, because that's what we do. We strengthen the intestines.
brilliant. That's so helpful. And you've mentioned, I think, one product at the moment, but do you just want to touch on sort of the difference between the different products that you offer?
Yeah, so we basically designed every product to target every single different area of the body. So you've got everything from mouth, which is the Toxaprevent Halostop, the chewables. It's a chewable green sweet. It's like a lemon flavor. It's very, very good for elderly people who are like, want diabetic free, sugar-free sweets for diabetic patients, but they're also great for kids as well because it's a chewable little sweet that they can chew on. Yeah, very, very good product for that. And that targets the mouth because you probably heard the term leaky mouth now. That's coming out, being coined more. And so that binds to toxins in the mouth, the throat, and the stomach. You've then got the Denturamed Zeolite toothpaste. Alex, one of the best toothpaste I have ever used. And I'm biased. I'm, I'm biased, but my God, the feedback we get is phenomenal. The toothpaste is based on the same zeolite, and what it does is it binds to histamine in the actual mouth. So, and it reduces inflammation in the actual in the mouth, but it also binds to sulfur and mycotoxins produced by bacteria like pyorrhea, gingivitis, caries, and which get into the gums, and it reduces inflammation, and it is phenomenal. We get some really good feedback. Favorite product, absolutely love it. If you want, I'll send you some to try because it is
Ah,
awesome.
thank you. Yeah, I didn't realize you had a toothpaste until I was on your website today, and then I spotted it. I was like, how did I not know about this?
Yeah, we brought it out. It took us 4 years to bring the damn products out because you know, have you ever heard of the abrasion scale? Like the RD, it's called relative dentine abrasion. And so
Oh,
dentists have to go by it. And what they do is, like, for example, like Arm& Hammer toothpaste is really high because it has bicarbonate soda, which rubs the enamel of the teeth to give it that white feeling. Whereas like Sensodyne is like number 70, so it's like medium abrasive or low abrasive because it repairs the enamel. We're number 50, so we're actually even lower than that. So we're actually less abrasive than Sensodyne. So it shows you how good it took us 3 years with the Berlin University to prove that we could actually reduce the sensitivity in the teeth and repair the gums. So awesome product. Then there's the Toxaprevent MediPlus sachets. So that's the purple box, and you mix that with water, and that basically targets the stomach and the esophagus. It does go into the intestines and the colon because that's the way it passes out the body. But because of the amount of toxins we have in our upper GI, it's not as effective down in the intestines and the colon. And what the sachets do is they bind to histamine and ammonium. And so for people with acid reflux or H. pylori, excellent for that. We can go into the mechanism action a bit later. Then there's the Toxaprevent MediPure, which is the red box. The capsules, they're basically enteric coated, but the capsule shower is designed by us. So it's a mixture of cellulose and gel and gum, but the gel and gum comes from pine. So we don't know anyone that reacts to pine. So we found that pine was the best way to do it. And that works in the intestines and the colon. But the way it's packed, the MediPure capsules, is that it slowly opens up in the intestines and colon. So it doesn't just open up in one part of it. Has a delayed release and goes for the entire intestines and colon. The next product is the Toxaprevent MediAcute. So that's the same as the MediPure, but the MediAcute's got the colostrum in there, which is honestly for allergy season, wicked product because, you know, as you know, colostrum is such an important factor in the immune system, but like balancing the immune system. It's used in first month for babies, and for adults we still need it. So we use this medical. The funny story is we actually tried to get breast milk. Don't ask me how. There's a German company out there that actually buy breast milk from women and they put it into products. Don't that I don't know how I came across that story, and but we couldn't put it in because it was from humans. We had to get it from cows. So we took the first and the third node of a cow, so the first and third udder, because that produces the highest level of colostrum. So these are like, you know, organic, grass-fed, antibiotic cows that we use part of the products. So yeah, that's the internal range. Then we've also got a skin range for the binding of histamine on the surface area, especially with people with lymphedema or severe skin irritations.
okay, brilliant. And I want to, before I forget, go back to what you mentioned around the mechanisms for the second product you mentioned, which is the sachet.
Yeah.
And someone's got reflux or H. pylori. Can you expand on that for everyone?
So yeah, so H. pylori is probably like one of our biggest babies at the moment. Like it's literally the prevalence for it is incredible. So we were looking at how H. pylori works in the stomach, and as you know, most people, you know, 50% of the population have it, but around about 15% have like the symptomatic versions of it. And there's different strains of H. pylori depending on the individual, and depending on our genetic makeup, we either will react or we won't react. And so with H. pylori, what it does is it produces histamine. And when it produces histamine, it basically increases the acidity in the stomach. And being a urease excreting enzyme, what it does is excretes urea, which divides the urea into carbon dioxide into ammonium. And when it degrades the two of them, the ammonia it uses it basically through it's like it's the hydrogen process. It turns the ammonia into ammonium, which then uses as a protective shield. And because the ammonium's like an alkalizer and the histamine acid's going up, that's what allows the flagella to swim and enter into the stomach lining. Because many people forget our stomach acid is actually quite viscose, so it's actually digging into it, and it will just keep releasing histamine, keep releasing ammonium. So one of Toxaprevent's patents was for histamine, the binding of histamine and ammonium. So Dr. Stanton was looking at this and he said, right, if you put this into the stomach, what will happen? And I don't know about you, but 1 + 1 = 2 here. You bind to the histamine, you remove that, you get rid of the symptoms and you reduce the acidity. But secondly, you bind to the ammonium. Once you've bound to the ammonium and removed that from the stomach, that that basically allows the stomach acid to naturally destroy the bacteria because you removed its shield. And so you'll see, like, we do like this 5-day protocol, and the results are incredible. We've got like a 98, 99% success rate. We have the odd person where they may need to repeat it because they've got a really severe amount of H. pylori. But wow, the protocol's so successful. And then we added in Pylopass into it, which is like it's albuterol DSM 17648, which is like a patented strain of albuterol, which basically coagulates. It's got glycoproteins which attach to the protein of H. pylori and then just pull it out the stomach.
Wow, brilliant.
So yeah,
That's super helpful. And I think, for some of our listeners who perhaps have done a gut test and we're experiencing some of those upper GI symptoms, seeing H. pylori, it's just another thing that can be considered in regards to supporting them. So I think that's a really helpful little clinical pearl for our listeners, whether practitioners or public, ultimately, for that matter. Amazing. Okay. I'm just thinking where we can go from here. Is there anything, Dilly, that comes to mind that you just want to make sure we get into today's chat?
I think one of the big things is you were asking about acid reflux earlier about
Yeah.
it, and I think reflux has been I don't know why, but recently, Alex, have you noticed that a lot of people have started to ask about acid reflux recently? It's we've had like a massive boost in people talking about it.
So, yeah, I would say from a Healthpath perspective, we do have a lot of customers, and it probably has increased over the last year or so.
It's interesting. Um, we were looking, so we've been looking at acid reflux for a while. We were trying to get we're in the process of trying to get the Halostops licensed as like a replacement for Rennies because of the way it binds to the ammonium and the histamine. And we've been working because obviously it sits in your handbag and you can your wallet or your pocket, whatever you want to call it, and it's a pretty good binder. But we were looking at like this increase in like protein content. I don't know if you've gone around the supermarkets and you've seen like all the supermarkets have like high protein. This
Yeah.
is full of protein. This is full of protein, and which is fantastic. It's nice to see that the foods are now being labeled with high protein. But one of the big things that we were looking at was like the byproduct of protein. So byproduct of protein is ammonia. So when the enzymes break it down, it releases ammonia. And ammonium, as we know, is quite toxic to the body. It's normally processed by urea and passed out of the kidneys via urine. But what we're starting to see an increase in things like acid reflux because of like high levels of ammonium. So we started looking at the research behind what triggers acid reflux in the first instance. And we've got the low stomach acid argument and the high stomach acid argument. I appreciate digestive enzymes, looking at protease, amylase, those sorts of areas. Fantastic. Definitely would agree with it. But the other end of it was looking at ammonium and seeing how it works. And what we were finding was when the protein was breaking down, the portal vein, which was pulling the blood through, was pulling things like ammonium through, and the kidneys to process the ammonium. What it would do is it would take away the bicarbonate from the stomach. So in your stomach, you have a 1-to-1 ratio of acid to bicarbonate. So one particle of acid to one particle bicarbonate. And the parietal cells which produce them, what would happen is, let's say your acid goes up, your bicarbonate goes up. So that just naturally counteracts it. But then if there's too much ammonium in the body, because of its toxic amount to the system, what would happen is the bicarbonate gets pulled out of the stomach into the kidneys to take away the ammonia, convert it to urea, and get it out into the urine. This then leaves the acid to cause more issues. So because the acid is causing more issues, and you've got to remember the parietal cells producing a 1-to-1 ratio, and what will happen is the acid will start to decrease, which then causes digestive issues, but then also can lead to high levels of acid where we get the acid reflux. So we started using Toxaprevent for the ammonium aspect of it. And one of the biggest areas that we work on is acid reflux. Because you're removing the ammonium, you actually free up the bicarbonate naturally to naturally counteract the stomach acid to then support with the stomach acid optimization. So because it's a pH buffer, if the bicarbonate goes up, so will the acid.
Okay.
So I just thought you might want to know that as like that's just my 7 or 8 years of like looking into acid reflux, but that's our mechanism of action for that.
Interesting. So have I understood that correctly in regards to in those who do have elevated stomach acids driving it, the Toxaprevent can be really helpful?
With ammonium, yeah, ammonium and histamine as well.
Yeah, because ammonia is kind of one of the mechanisms that's driving that.
Yeah.
And I guess in those with low stomach acids, it's certainly not having any negative impact from that perspective.
No, because ammonium is also an alkalizer. So it can actually alkalize the stomach acid and stop it from being used correctly. And you've got to remember the pancreas and the gallbladder are producing the enzymes to help with digestion. But if there's too many toxins in the system and they're not functioning correctly and they're trying to break down the waste products, how are they going to produce their enzymes? That's where we're getting a lot of issues. So it's like a dominoes effect. Like I think we could use that term, Alex. I think we could say the word domino effect.
Yeah,
So
I use that term all the time to describe this.
yeah, so it's literally like a domino effect because the body's becoming toxic and it's just knocking the rest of the gut out of balance. And it's like and you need to just put a stop at it, and then someone needs to go in and stick the dominoes back up again. I think that's the best way to do it.
Exactly. And, as you were saying there, the pH of the stomach has such a role to play within allowing a positive domino effect, so to speak, within the production of pancreatic enzymes, bile, etc. So there are two ways to think of this kind of domino effect taking place ultimately. That's really interesting. Thank you for showing that, Dilly.
Yeah,
It's always nice to know kind of how things are actually working.
yeah, it's an interesting area, I think, because because I don't know if you've ever looked at it from like an Ayurvedic approach as well, like where because I know Ayurveda is starting to take a big scene in the area, and we when we a lot of the team when they're talking to talking to customers and stuff. A lot of the time when they're looking at protein, one of the big things that some of our functional medicine practitioners talk about is like adding in fruit before you have like a heavy protein meal. So your passion fruit, your pineapple, your oranges, and your anything that's going to produce the enzymes to better absorb the amino acids to break down and pull the protein into the system. I think that's such a really big way of supporting it as well. Just a little gem of food for thought, as you say.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of those natural enzymes that we get from our food that for whatever reason, this isn't something that, we get taught ultimately. I think there's that myth around uh, not eating fruits before protein because it's gonna, sit there and sort of ferment, etc. But actually, as you listed there are some fruits that could be really helpful for the digestive process. Throw in there some bitters as well, and then you've got a really good sort of pre-meal support.
Well, we've looked at all what's the big cool talk about now. Everyone's like fermented foods, have a fermented meal with everything, and it's like which is great. And I say to everyone, have fermented food, but then if you've got histamine intolerance, you don't want to be encouraging the fermented foods because you'll trigger a histamine response, and especially things like with like supporting the wrong bacteria as well. And that as well as I do, like if you have too much of the wrong fermented product, you can end up encouraging the bad bacteria to kind of increase and grow. So it's I always say to people, when you're gonna add, like, if you're reactive to certain foods, because we get this, like, I'll always add an email today, and some lady was like, she's like, "Oh, Dilly, like, I saw your Instagram post, they're brilliant, and the food groups and everything, but you didn't list these teas in one of your posts." And she's like, "Can I drink them?" It was like dandelion, lavender, chamomile, lemon balm. Can I drink these teas? And I was just like, crap, like, I was looking at them thinking, these aren't high histamine teas. And then I sat there thinking, I was like, well, hold up. The one big thing people forget is, like, what you react to, someone else won't react to. So I always say to people, if you're using Toxaprevent, it's a trial and error process. Like, because food isn't the problem. Food is not the problem. I'm sorry, it's just not the problem. Teas aren't the problem. It's not what you're putting into your system. It's just your immune system, your body being overreactive. So take away the histamine and then introduce those foods. And you'll gradually see that your body will stop reacting to it. And honestly, it's you know, and I'll get the call, Dilly, I had my first glass of wine the other day. It was incredible. I'm like, hey, I told you would, and say now, cheers to you, and that's it. And people, like, I drink a cup of coffee every morning, enjoy my coffee, no histamine issues whatsoever. I eat cheese on the weekend. It's great.
Brilliant. I think that is one of the most important messages, I think, which is food is not the problem. And I'll just add a little caveat to that, which is most of the time, obviously, there's always exceptions to the rule with some of these things. But the way I put it to clients is food is not the problem, it's kind of the messenger. That there's something going on that means you're just having an inappropriate response to that food or something within the food. And you can use that then to guide, where you go from there. But with Toxaprevent, Dilly, either through your own experience, the research, or just your customers, I mean, would Toxaprevent have a fairly immediate impact on someone's tolerance to histamine-containing foods, or is it something that takes a little bit of time as the actual underlying issues get addressed as well?
So the best way to put this is an anecdote from a customer. I got a call from a customer because one of her friends recommended Toxaprevent Ready Plus sachets to her, and she said to me on the phone, she was like, "Dilly, I just want to let you know, if I have dairy, like I'm really dairy, like I'm really lactose intolerant. If I have any dairy, I'm on the floor." And I was just like, "What do you mean you're on the floor?" She was like, "I basically will, it's like talking, it's like I'm drunk." She's like, "It's literally like I'm drunk. Like, it's just such a histamine rush." And she goes, "What will happen is," like, she goes, "the best way to describe it is she'll have to go onto the floor and crawl to bed and lie in bed, and she's gone for the whole day. She won't talk." And she goes, "It can even be something as silly as having dairy in the environment. So let's say someone's baking or making cereal. If it even gets a bit of dairy in a food, she's had it at restaurants." And then she said one day it happened, and her friend had heard of Toxaprevent, so she gave her the sachets, and she now calls it magic unicorn powder. I was just like, "Are you serious?" She was like, "Yep." She's like, "Dilly, this is magic unicorn powder." She said, "I get a reaction, and don't get me wrong, it's not an antihistamine." She goes, "But I take Toxaprevent. If I have a dairy reaction, I literally take it 15 minutes, maybe 30 minutes max, different person." And I was just like,
Oh,
yeah, and that's the one way to describe it, is that it can be acute in terms of, like, going in and binding to the histamine when it's being released, but it can also be used in that long-term detoxification of histamine.
yeah.
But obviously you can't negate medical, if you need the EpiPen shot, damn it, get to the hospital. Don't try and shoot yourself with Toxaprevent. But it's that benefit that we get, these little quippets of anecdotes where customers are coming in and saying, "I have it and I just feel amazing afterwards." And that's really common.
Yeah, that's thank you for sharing that, because I think it also can, not that we want to give the impression that we want to rely on supplements, but there are a lot of people that are suffering and are losing hope in their chronic health issues. And the fact that people can have such a severe reaction, and there are some people out there who are having that such a positive immediate impact, is just, yeah, hopefully gives hope to a few people and shows us the power of Toxaprevent in this case, in these sorts of situations.
Yeah, I think she actually left a review on the Trustpilot. I don't know about you, but I think it's been such an important factor for our growth in business is actually getting like real reviews from customers and stuff. And I think I think that for us personally, that's been such a because we've never really got reviews from people before. It was like, when you hear things anecdotally from people and you get your long-term customers who have been using us for years and stuff. And then it was just, I started like sat there and I said, look, we need to start capturing these reviews. And I started doing, I like literally went to Trustpilot, teamed up with them, got really close with some of the top people in Trustpilot and spoke to them and said, right, we need to capture our reviews for our products. And now we're starting to see them trickle through, like all these histamine tolerance, H. pylori reviews, migraine reviews, and you name it, they're all coming through now. And you read them and it's so nice. Like, I love this idea that, like, I know that we have like the B Corporation side certificate side of things, but it is like, end of the day, businesses are a business and they are there to, like, make a profit and keep your employees employed and stuff. But it's so strong. Like, one big thing that we've always had from when we first started many, many years ago is that we want to do business where we have a benefit to the individual user. And it's just like, I think that is like in itself is like a privilege. The fact that you
Yeah.
can get that call from someone and say, hey, I just want to let you know, like, you were so helpful in giving me your support and I really appreciate your time and I've done what you've said and it's actually made this much of a benefit to my life. And I think, no matter what we do or anything that we do in life, that is the biggest kind of like it's it's like someone like your teacher or your parent kind of tapping the back going, good job. It's
Yeah.
literally that. It's like a really bad version of that. Is that film? Is it Hitchcock or something? Where he's like, good job, guys. It's literally that.
Brilliant. Yeah, it's nourishing. It's nourishing for the soul, isn't it? I think what you're describing there as well. Dilly, thank you so much. This has been, I think, really helpful. I think everyone's going to have found this helpful, both practitioners that tune in to understand a little bit more about Toxaprevent and how it works. They can share that with their clients, but also our public who, as I said earlier, so many are struggling with what look like histamine intolerant symptoms that I think this podcast is going to be really helping a lot of people. So thank you for your patience, as I said at the beginning, and thank you for coming on and sharing your work.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks for having me. I really do appreciate being on the Healthpath podcast, and hopefully we look forward to bringing out more innovations and talking more.
Yeah, definitely. Make sure I'm aware because, for example, I wasn't aware of the toothpaste. So if when new products come out, give me a shout and we'll jump on a call.
I will do, buddy.